Chapter 11, Finishing Workout. Damon's legs trembled as he lowered himself into the 5th squat, his thin thighs straining to support his body. He felt the familiar burn in his quadriceps and hamstrings, the muscles screaming in protest as he descended further. His knees creaked softly, the sound echoing through the quiet alley like a faint whisper. As he reached the bottom of the squat, Damon's balance wavered, his body swaying precariously to one side. He gritted his teeth, his jaw clenched in determination, and forced himself to steady. His arms extended in front of him, his hands splayed wide, as he struggled to maintain control. He felt the rough texture of the pavement beneath him, the slight grittiness of the asphalt digging into his skin through his thin pants. Sweat dripped down his face, the salty liquid stinging his eyes, but he refused to blink. Damon knew the last rep would be the hardest. So he didn't delay, didn't hesitate. He dropped down, his body sinking into the squat like a stone. His muscles screamed in agony, the pain intensifying as he reached the bottom. He felt the strain in his legs, the burn spreading through his muscles like wildfire. His knees creaked again, the sound louder this time, as he struggled to rise. Damon's arms trembled, his hands shaking, as he pushed himself up, his body slowly ascending from the squat. Finally, he stood, his legs trembling beneath him, his body swaying slightly. He rested for some time. He didn't know how far midnight was, he hoped not too far. He opened the tab again to recheck what was next. The blue holographic screen appeared in front of him. At Novelbanat at Saturday. -10 minutes jog, completed. -10 push-ups, sit-ups, squats. Completed. Shadow boxing 3 rounds of 3 minutes each. Basic strikes, punches, elbows, knees, and kicks. Damon's eyes narrowed as he gazed at the holographic screen, his mind racing with questions. What was shadow boxing? He had never heard of it before. Was it some sort of martial arts technique? He tried pressing on the option, hoping to find an explanation. The screen flickered, and a new window opened, displaying a detailed description of shadow boxing. Damon's eyes scanned the text, his brow furrowed in concentration. Shadow boxing is a training method used to practice hand-eye coordination, footwork, and punching technique. It involves throwing punches at an imaginary opponent, mimicking the movements of a real fight. Damon's gaze lingered on the words, his mind struggling to comprehend the concept. He had never practiced anything like this before. He only knew of physical labor, not imaginary fights. Damon's thoughts returned to the task at hand. He had to complete the shadow boxing exercise. But how? He had no experience, no guidance. He took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling slowly. He would have to figure it out himself. Damon raised his fists, his arms trembling slightly. He began to throw punches, his movements awkward and uncoordinated. The sound of his fists slicing through the air echoed through the alley, a soft whooshing noise that seemed to reverberate off the walls. Damon's eyes darted back and forth, his gaze fixed on some invisible opponent. He threw another punch, his arm extending in front of him. His hand trembled, his fingers splayed wide. Damon's movements were slow and clumsy, but he persisted. He threw punch after punch, his arms aching with fatigue. The minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. Damon's breathing grew heavier, his chest heaving with exertion. Finally, the first round was over. Damon lowered his arms, his fists still clenched. He took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the screen. 2 more rounds to go. He steeled himself, his mind focused on the task ahead. He would complete the shadow boxing exercise, no matter how difficult it seemed. 8 minutes had passed, and Damon had completed 2 more shadow spars of 3 minutes each. He stood up, his tired smirk still plastered on his face, and gazed at the panel again. His blue eyes sparkled with a hint of determination. The system message appeared, and Damon's eyes scanned the text. Muay Thai is the art of 8 limbs. Fists, traditional boxing punches such as the jab, cross, hook, and uppercut. Elbows, elbow strikes that can be used in close-range combat. Knees, knee strikes, often used in clinch fighting. Shins, kicks delivered with the shin, including roundhouse kicks, teep, push kicks, and low kicks. Damon understood what he had to do. He would train each limb, just like he did during shadow fighting, but with a specific goal in mind. He decided to set a goal for himself, 100 strikes for each limb. He smiled, confident he could do it. After all, he had nothing to lose, except for his life, if he failed. Damon started with the fists. He threw a jab, the punch slicing through the air with a soft whooshing noise. He followed it with a cross, the movement smooth and fluid. His eyes focused on an invisible target, his gaze fixed intently. He threw hook after hook, his arms aching with fatigue. As he reached 50 jabs, Damon's arms began to tremble. His breathing grew heavier, his chest heaving with exertion. But he persisted, his mind fixed on the goal. He completed the 100 jabs, his arms dropping to his sides. He took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the screen. Next were the elbows. Damon raised his arms, his elbows bent at a 90-degree angle. He struck the air with his elbow, the movement swift and precise. The sound of his elbow striking the air was different from his fists, a sharper, more muted noise. Chapter 12, Survival Mode. The morning light crept over the horizon, casting a warm glow over the city of Stockton, California. A family of two lay huddled together in a small alley between two run-down buildings. They rested next to a trash can. Their temporary bed was made of old blankets and cardboard boxes. Damon woke up to the sound of his own groaning. His body ached from the exercise he did the night before. He slowly opened his eyes to find himself in the same alley where he slept. He was lying on a piece of cardboard, and his mother was sleeping next to him. He carefully got up, trying not to wake his mother. His muscles hurt, and his stomach felt empty. He hadn't eaten since yesterday. Damon looked around and saw the alley was still quiet. He stood up and stretched. His joints cracked, and his legs felt weak. Damon took a deep breath and started to move. He walked around the alley, trying to get his blood flowing. The system's message from last night was still on his mind. He had to do another exercise today. Damon didn't know what it would be. Damon chuckled, at this point, I won't even make it to the fight. The sound of his own voice was hoarse from fatigue. He heard a rustling behind him and turned around to see his mother waking up. At novelbanat. He straightened up, trying to ignore the aching in his muscles. Eva woke up from her slumber, stretching her arms above her head. She felt refreshed, especially after having a meal last night for the first time in a long time. Her stomach no longer growled with hunger, and her mind felt clearer. She saw her son standing weirdly, his posture stiff and his face scrunched up in discomfort. She stood up, her movement slow. Morning, Damon, you're up early today, she said. Her voice was husky from sleep, but her eyes sparkled with warmth. She looked at her son, taking in his disheveled appearance. His black hair was messy. And his clothes were rumpled. His eyes looked sunken, and his skin was pale. Damon didn't respond. He just kept standing there, trying to muster up the energy to move. Eva took a step closer to him, her eyes narrowing slightly. Damon, are you okay? You look like you've been through a war. It was a soft voice that was filled with worry. Damon's gaze drifted to his mother, taking in her worn face, her tired eyes, and her gentle smile. I was exercising last night, but it's fine, I'll soon get used to it. Don't worry, Damon said, trying to reassure his mother. He didn't want her to worry about him, so he downplayed the intensity of the workout. Oiwaf's eyes narrowed, her brow furrowed in concern. What do you mean you were exercising? Look at you, this is not healthy. Don't be forcing your body like that, she exclaimed, her Irish accent thick with worry. She grasped his face, her hands cool and gentle. She pulled his body into a hug, her arms wrapping tightly around him. Damon cried out, Ow, ow, Mom, that hurts. His muscles protested the sudden movement, and he winced in pain. Eva laughed, a warm, throaty sound, and said, You deserve it. Come on, boy. Stop hurting yourself like that. Her voice was stern, but her eyes sparkled with amusement. As she hugged him, Damon felt his mother's warmth, her softness, and her gentle strength. The smell of her skin was like the alley, with sweat and dirt on it. Damon's face was pressed against her shoulder, and he felt her heartbeat, steady and strong. Eva held him at arm's length, examining his face, her eyes scanning his features. You need to take care of yourself, Damon. You can't keep pushing yourself like this. Her voice was firm, but her eyes were soft. Damon looked away, not wanting to meet her gaze, knowing she could see the pain and exhaustion etched on his face. The day passed in a blur of fatigue and determination. Despite his mother's protests, Damon went for a run, his legs aching and his lungs burning. As he ran, the system suddenly appeared before him. He looked around, finding a quiet spot between two dumpsters, and opened the system panel. The message on the screen was unexpected, but welcome. Due to certain circumstances, the system shop will be partially unlocked to ensure host survival. The items, necessary consumptions, has been given access. Damon's eyes widened as he opened the shop panel, scanning the list of items. Fresh fruit, bottled water, and energy bars lined the virtual shelves. His gaze lingered on the apples and bananas, but his eyes widened when he saw the price tag, 1 coin per item. Damon's gaze shot to the top of the screen, where his coin balance was displayed. He had 1 coin, and he wondered if it was a reward for completing the daily challenge. Emotions swirled inside him, frustration, sadness, and a hint of hope. As he scrolled through the list, 1 item caught his eye: water. It was essential, especially with his new exercise routine. He pressed the purchase button, and the system responded. 5 liters of water have been purchased. Remove the item from the shop inventory when ready to take it. Damon didn't retrieve the water yet. He realized he needed an excuse to explain to his mother where he got it. He couldn't just produce 5 liters of water out of thin air. He thought about hiding it, but where? Their makeshift home was too small, and his mother would surely notice. Damon knew he couldn't hide the water from his mother. She needed it just as much as he did. He thought for a moment, then a plan formed in his mind. He would tell her he found it in a nearby abandoned building, or that someone gave it to him. It wasn't a perfect excuse, but it would have to do. Chapter 13, Guillotine Choke. While jogging back to the alley, Damon's feet hit the cracked concrete hard. His lungs were burning and breathing was hard. He was so tired that the cool morning air didn't help much. It was like a wet shroud around him. Every step he took and every shaky gasp of air made him feel even more tired. He turned the corner into the lane and saw his mother getting up from her makeshift bed. She was looking at the big bottle of water he was holding. There were lines of confusion in her face, and she took a slow, determined step forward. When Damon looked into her eyes, he felt a little anxious. He had been thinking about what to say in preparation for this moment, but now that it was here, he wasn't sure what to do. When he stopped in front of his mother, he slowed down and his feet hit the ground together. He could feel the water bottle being heavy in his hands. The plastic was cool and smooth against his skin. He could feel the beads of water on the outside, which showed that there was a cold water inside. His mom's eyes never left his face. She was looking for answers. A fly buzzed around Damon's head, making a loud, annoying noise. He hit it half-heartedly, but his eyes never left his mother's. Oiwaf's voice broke the silence, her Irish accent thick with concern. "Damon, where did you get that water?" Her eyes narrowed slightly, her gaze intense. Damon took a deep breath, working hard enough to make his chest heave. He could feel sweat running down his face, and the thought of the cool water made him very thirsty. He knew he had to be careful and come up with a good reason for why the water had appeared out of nowhere. Damon's eyes darted to the ground. His mother was the only person he didn't like to lie to, but the system's secret seemed too dangerous to share. The uncertainty of its origins and purpose made him hesitant to involve Aoife, fearing potential consequences. His mother interrupted him as he was about to tell the story, her voice full of caution mixed with worry. "I'm feckin' sure you didn't steal the water. Am right, Damon? You know what would happen if we got caught." Damon's hands tightened around the water container, his palms growing sweaty. He intercepted his mother's sentence, his voice firm but cautious. "No, Mum, I didn't steal the water. It was those guys that own the backyard fight. I asked for it. They told me I could take it whenever I want, so there's no need to worry. I didn't steal anything, I promise you." He saw his mother's look, and the words came out well crafted. Her stare scanned his face with her deep brown eyes. Aoife let her shoulders drop, and her sigh was like a soft breeze. She seemed to believe what he said. She might have trusted her son too much, or she didn't have had any other choice. She lowered her voice. "Then sit down. I'm sure you're very tired from your exercise, so make sure to drink the water." Damon nodded, his eyes never leaving his mother's face. It made him feel bad that he lied to her, but the system's secret stayed safe, hidden behind a thin veil of lies. He took a slow seat on the ground and put the water bottle next to him. Its presence reminded them of the strange forces that were affecting their lives. Damon's mind wandered to how nice it was to have a steady flow of water, which was something they hadn't had in a long time. They still had bananas that Joey had gifted Damon. But now, with the system's promise of rewards for exercise, Damon felt a sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could break free from the cycle of scrounging for food. The system panel appeared in front of him as he was thinking about it. Its vivid blue color stood out against the surroundings. The message flashed on the screen. System recommendation: drink the F-rank body training. Enhancement: to make training easier. Damon's eyes widened as he remembered the item, previously inaccessible due to his lack of understanding. He slowly looked around and then his eyes fell on his mother, who was looking through a dumpster nearby. Her steps were measured, and the way she looked at the trash was like she had practiced. He recalled the drink's description, a supposed aid to make training easier. Damon's curiosity was piqued, and he wondered if it would genuinely help. His eyes darted back to his mother, ensuring she was still distracted. Satisfied, he focused on the panel, his fingers hovering over the screen. Damon's eyes fixed on the system panel, his fingers hovering over the icons. He clicked on the bottle-like container, and the message flashed before him, at Novelman at. Are you sure you want to take out the body training enhancer? Once you take it out you have 24 hours before expiration which will turn into water. Why/N. He kept looking at the text for a while, thinking about what to do. He was going to train later tonight, but the enhancer's time limit made him think twice. Damon's thoughts went to the other things he had gotten from the system and then to the submission move. He opened the gift inventory and skimmed the list until he found the card with the lock icon. The card's surface was covered in elaborate patterns that gave it an unearthly energy that seemed to pulse. With some hesitation, Damon reached out and touched the card. The lock shattered, exploding into a burst of blue light that seemed to sear itself into Damon's retina. His mind recoiled, struggling to process the influx of information. The blue light dissipated, leaving behind a faint sound that resonated through his skull. Guillotine choke skill card unlocked. The message flashed, a stark contrast to the sensory overload Damon had just experienced. His eyes felt dry, his vision blurry from the intensity of the blue light. The sounds of the alley muffled by the ringing in his ears. Damon's thoughts swirled, trying to make sense of the new information flooding his mind. Damon's vision cleared, and a new system panel appeared before him. The text on the screen was crisp and clear. Skill card proficiency guillotine choke, 0.99%. He felt a sense of excitement, a thrill that came with learning something new. Another message appeared. Skill card proficiency are skills moves given by the system. To show the host mastery on IT, they are easier to learn. Damon's gaze lingered on the screen, absorbing the information. A third message flashed. Self-learned skills won't be put on the category and hosts will have to learn from scratch unless given something that can help improve. Damon's vision got fuzzy, and his thoughts got lost in the system's digital fog. So, he felt clear and had a feeling of purpose. He was aware that if he really got good at the guillotine choke, he might have a better chance of winning this fight. He removed the system panel. Damon's eyes widened in surprise as he took in the sight before him. His mother, Eva, was on the ground, her body moving in a slow, awkward rhythm. She was trying to do push-ups, and each timid press made her arms shake. Even though she wasn't in great shape, her back was sagging and her legs were shaking. She kept going, her face set in a determined frown. As Damon looked at his mother, his confusion grew. He couldn't figure out how to connect this new picture with the woman he thought he knew. The woman who had always seemed so fragile, so worn down by the hardships of their life, was now exerting herself in a way he had never seen before. He stood up, his movements slow and quiet as if he feared startling her into stopping. "Mom, what are you doing?" he asked. His voice laced with a mix of confusion and concern. Eva paused, her chest heaving with exertion, and looked up at her son. A sly smirk spread across her face, her eyes glinting with a hint of mischief. "Since you're exercising I thought I should too," she said. "I don't want my bones to kill me with arthritis for sitting so idle so much." Damon's jaw hung open, his mouth agape in shock, as he stared at his mother in utter bewilderment. Chapter 14, Development. Night fell swiftly, casting a dark shadow over the alley. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic and the occasional scurrying of rodents through the trash. Damon and his mother finished their meager dinner of bananas and bread, the dry crust scratching the roof of Damon's mouth. He savored the sweet taste of the bananas, the texture soft and slightly grainy. The bread was stale, but it filled his stomach. As his mother drifted off to sleep, Damon stood up, his joints cracking softly. He stretched his arms over his head, feeling the familiar ache in his muscles. He had only started training the day before, but his body already felt the strain. Damon opened the gift inventory, the screen glowing with a soft blue light. His eyes scanned the list until they landed on the F-rank body training enhancer. He had been waiting for this moment, wondering if the enhancer would really make a difference. He clicked on it, and a message appeared in front of him. "Are you sure you want to take IT out? Why/N. Damon's finger hovered over the screen for a moment before clicking yes. He felt a thrill of excitement mixed with a little fear. A small, blue bottle materialized in his hand, the plastic cool and smooth against his skin. The cap was slightly indented, making it easy to grip. Damon turned the bottle over, feeling the weight of it. It was small, about the size of his palm, and weighed almost nothing. Another message appeared. F-Rank Body Training Enhancer IT is drink that enhances the gains attained through training, increasing development, lessens the pain, the effect lasts through a week. Damon's eyes scanned the message, his mind processing the information. He looked at the bottle, the blue liquid inside glowing slightly in the dim light. He smiled, feeling a sense of excitement and trepidation. A week of enhanced training could make all the difference. He thought about his upcoming fight, his heart racing with anticipation. Damon's grip on the bottle tightened, his determination growing. Damon's fingers wrapped around the small, blue bottle, feeling the smooth, cool surface. He brought it to his nose, inhaling the scent of the liquid inside. It was sweet, with a hint of bitterness, like a mix of fruit juice and medicine. He unscrewed the cap and a faint hiss escaped, releasing a puff of air that carried the same sweet bitter aroma. Damon's eyes locked onto the liquid inside, its surface reflecting the dim light of the alley like a tiny mirror. He tilted the bottle, pouring the liquid into his mouth. It was thick, like syrup, and it coated his tongue with its sweet bitter taste. Damon swallowed, feeling the liquid slide down his throat, leaving a trail of warmth in its wake. As soon as the liquid hit his stomach, Damon felt a surge of energy, like a spark had been lit inside him. His muscles seemed to hum, his heart beating faster, pumping blood through his veins with renewed vigor. The air in the alley seemed to vibrate, the sounds of the city taking on a sharper quality, like his senses had been heightened. Damon's skin tingled, his nerves alive with the sensation of the enhancer coursing through his body. He stood up, feeling the energy build in his muscles, his joints loosening, his tendons stretching. His feet seemed to lift off the ground as if he was floating, his movements becoming lighter, more fluid. Damon's eyes locked onto the system panel, still open in front of him. The message flashed. Effects of F-Rank Body Training Enhancer activated. He felt the effects, his body transformed, his senses heightened, his muscles empowered. With a sense of excitement, Damon closed the system panel, his eyes scanning the alley. The shadows seemed to pulse with energy, the darkness taking on a life of its own. He knew it was time to train, to push his body to its limits, to see what he was capable of. The night stretched out before him, a canvas waiting to be filled with the brushstrokes of his determination. Damon took a deep breath, the cool air filling his lungs, and began to move, his body a blur of motion, his spirit afire with the thrill of discovery. Damon's arms moved in a smooth, fluid motion as he dropped down to do push-ups. He counted out loud, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, his voice steady and calm. He continued, his body moving in a rhythmic motion, his muscles flexing with each repetition. As he reached 20, 30, 40, he began to feel a slight tingling sensation in his arms, a gentle warmth spreading through his muscles. He pushed on, his breathing steady, his focus solely on the exercise. At 50, 60, 70, the tingling sensation grew, becoming a gentle buzzing, like a vibration humming through his muscles. Damon's smile grew wider, his excitement building. He lost count, his focus solely on the sensation in his muscles. He felt a slight strain, a gentle tension, but it was nothing compared to what he had experienced before. He pushed on, his body moving with a newfound ease. As he reached the end of the exercise, Damon stopped, his arms trembling slightly with fatigue. His smile spread wide across his face. "Ha ha ha ha, this is it," he exclaimed, forgetting his mother was sleeping. He felt a rush of excitement, a sense of accomplishment. He had never felt so alive, so energized. He continued with the exercises, his body moving with a newfound fluidity. He did squats, lunges, planks, each exercise feeling easier than the last. He overdid them, passing the number, his body moving with a newfound strength. Sweat dripped from his brow, his muscles trembling with fatigue, but he didn't stop. He kept pushing, his body moving with a newfound power. As he finished the last exercise, Damon stood up, his chest heaving with exhaustion. He felt a sense of pride, of accomplishment. He had never felt so strong, so capable. His mother stirred, waking up from her sleep. Damon froze, his heart racing with excitement. He had forgotten she was there, forgotten everything except the rush of adrenaline coursing through his veins. Damon's mother, Aoife, looked at him with a mix of concern and curiosity. Her eyes scanned his face, taking in the sweat-drenched skin, the flushed cheeks, and the bright, shining eyes. She had never seen him like this before, so full of energy and life. "Damon, come here, boy," she said, her voice firm but gentle. Damon cursed under his breath, realizing he should have been quieter. He didn't want to raise her suspicions. At Novelbanadat. He walked closer, his feet heavy with exhaustion, but his heart still racing with excitement. Aoife grabbed his face, her hands cool and gentle, and looked into his eyes. She opened them wide, examining them like a doctor searching for signs of illness. "Are you on gear drugs? You know the stuff is not good for you," she asked, her voice laced with worry. Damon defended himself, feeling a surge of indignation. "No, Mom, I'm not on anything," he said, trying to sound calm. "I've just been working out, that's all." Aoife looked at him skeptically, her eyes narrowing. She had seen the signs. Before, the energy, the excitement, the sweat-drenched skin. She had seen it in his father, before he had fallen into the abyss of addiction. Damon knew what she was thinking, and he knew he had to convince her. He took a deep breath, trying to calm down, trying to reassure her. "Mom, I swear, I'm not on anything. I've just been training, really hard. This is just the result of my hard work." Aoife looked at him, her eyes searching for the truth. She wanted to believe him, she really did. But she had been burned before, and she couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. For the next 7 days, Damon's routine remained unchanged. He woke up every morning, his muscles aching with a familiar soreness, and began his workout. His mother, Aoife, watched him with a hawk's eye, monitoring his every move, every sweat drop, every labored breath. As the days passed, Damon felt his body transform. His skinny frame remained, but it was no longer weak. He felt a newfound strength coursing through his veins, a power that he couldn't quite explain. His muscles grew, slowly but surely, his biceps bulging slightly, his triceps toning, his legs strengthening. He could feel the changes, small but significant, like a whisper in his ear. Aoife saw it too, her eyes narrowing as she watched her son's transformation. She saw the sweat dripping from his brow. But as the days turned into a week, Aoife's vigilance began to wane. She grew tired of watching, tired of worrying, tired of wondering if her son was succumbing to the same demons that had consumed his father. So she stopped watching, stopped monitoring, stopped worrying. She let Damon be. Let him continue his workout routine without her hawk's eye scrutinizing his every move. Damon felt the freedom, the ability to push himself without his mother's watchful gaze. He worked out harder, faster, stronger, his body responding to the newfound intensity. He felt strong, like he could definitely beat his past self. He felt like he could take on the world, like nothing could stop him. And he knew, deep down, that he owed it all to the mysterious system. Chapter 15, Rest and Preparation. Damon slowly opened his eyes, the dim light of the alley gradually coming into focus. He was lying on a makeshift bed of old boxes and discarded clothes, his body feeling a mix of fatigue and anticipation. He had grown accustomed to the hard, rough surface beneath him, but today was different. Today was the day before the fight. As he sat up, a message appeared in front of him, the soft glow of the system's screen illuminating the dark alley. Pre-match day, no excessive exercising, this is the day of rest and preparation. Damon's eyes narrowed, his mind racing with questions. No exercising. But he had grown to enjoy the rush of endorphins, the feeling of his muscles working together in harmony. He wondered if he should go against the system's advice, push himself to new limits, but something held him back. Stretch for 30 minutes. He sighed, deciding to trust the system's guidance. He slowly stood up, his joints cracking softly, and began to stretch. His muscles lengthened, his tendons flexing as he moved slowly, deliberately. The alley was quiet, the only sound the distant hum of traffic, the occasional scurrying of rodents through the trash. Damon's movements were the only disturbance, his breathing steady, his focus solely on the stretch. As he stretched, Damon's mind wandered to the fight ahead. He thought about his opponent, wondered what he would be like, how he would move. He thought about his own strategy, his strengths and weaknesses. At Novelbanadat. The 30 minutes passed slowly, but Damon didn't rush. He savored the feeling of relaxation, the calmness that settled over him like a blanket. When he finished, Damon stood up, his body feeling loose, his mind clear. He knew what he had to do today: rest, prepare, and focus. He would visualize the fight, think about every possible scenario, every move he could make. He walked over to the wall, leaning against it, his eyes fixed on some point in the distance. He knew tomorrow would be different, but for now, he just rested. System will begin body scan, any drug or enhancement will be removed from the body. Damon's eyes widened as he read the message, his mind racing with concern. He stood up straight, his back against the alley wall, and protested, "Wait, what? What about the enhancement you gave me? Enhancements provided by the system are temporary and will be removed before the fight. This is to ensure a fair match." Damon's eyes scanned the message, his brow furrowed in worry. He had grown reliant on the F-rank body training enhancer, and the thought of it being removed from his system made him anxious. He thought about the fight ahead, his opponent, and his own abilities. Without the enhancer, would he still have an edge? Or would he be on the same level as the others, fighting with nothing but his raw skills? Damon's hands clenched into fists, his nails digging into his palms. He felt a surge of frustration, his mind racing with questions and doubts. But the system remained silent, its message clear, any enhancements would be removed. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself down. He thought about his training, his skills, and his strategy. He could still win without the enhancer, he told himself. He just had to focus. Body scan initiated. Any drugs or enhancements will be removed from the body. As he stood there, trying to reassure himself, Damon felt a strange sensation wash over him. It was as if his body was being scanned, his cells and tissues examined. He felt a slight tingling, a gentle buzzing, like his body was being prodded and poked from the inside out. The sensation was uncomfortable, but Damon tried to relax. He knew it was the system's doing, its way of removing any enhancements from his body. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and waited for the process to finish. The minutes ticked by, slow and agonizing. Damon's mind raced with thoughts and doubts, but he tried to stay focused. He knew what he had to do, what he had to accomplish. Finally, the sensation stopped. Damon opened his eyes, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. He took a deep breath, his chest expanding, and let it out slowly. Damon felt a sudden urge to pee, a pressing sensation that couldn't be ignored. Luckily, the alley where he and his mother stayed wasn't far from a public restroom. He glanced over at his mother, who was still sleeping, her body exhausted from the intense exercise routine she had been following. Damon was happy to see her pushing herself, knowing it was good for her health. He quickly got up and made his way to the restroom, his feet carrying him swiftly across the short distance. As he entered the men's restroom, he was hit with the familiar smell of urine and grime. The air was thick with the stench, but Damon was used to it. He had grown accustomed to the unpleasant odors that came with living on the streets. He made his way to the cubicle, his eyes scanning the room for any signs of trouble. The restroom was quiet, with only a few people coming and going. Damon entered the cubicle, locking the door behind him. As he stood there, he let loose, feeling the relief wash over him. But as the minutes ticked by, he began to feel a growing sense of unease. 1 minute turned into 2, 2 turned into 4, and still, he was peeing. The stream showed no signs of slowing, no signs of stopping. People began to filter in and out of the restroom, casting curious glances his way as they waited for the other stalls to open up. They would glance at him, then quickly look away, their faces scrunched up in confusion and disgust. Damon was shocked too. He had never experienced anything like this before. Was this healthy? Was this normal? He didn't know, but he knew it had to be related to the system's clearing process. As the minutes continued to tick by, 6, 8, 10, Damon started to feel a sense of embarrassment. He was the only one in the restroom still peeing, and the stairs were becoming more and more uncomfortable. He shifted his weight, trying to will the stream to stop, but it just kept going. He felt like he was going to be stuck there forever, a never-ending fountain of urine. The smell in the restroom was bad enough, but now Damon was adding his own unique aroma to the mix. He felt a wave of humiliation wash over him as he realized he was becoming the source of the stench. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the stream began to slow, then trickle, then stop. Damon let out a sigh of relief as he shook himself off, feeling a mix of emotions, embarrassment, confusion, and a hint of fear. Chapter 16 arrived. The rest of the day passed in a blur of relaxation and quiet contemplation. Damon returned to the alley, his mind still reeling from the strange experience in the restroom. He didn't even think about exercising, his body feeling drained from the morning's events. His mother, on the other hand, was a different story. She continued to push herself, her determination and grit evident in every rep and every set. Damon watched her with a mix of admiration and concern, hoping that she wouldn't overdo it. As the day wore on, Damon's thoughts turned to the fight ahead. He hoped that he could win, that he could emerge victorious and take the first step towards a better life. He knew that a backyard fight was just the beginning, that if he could succeed, he would have the chance to compete on a bigger stage. He imagined himself on TV, his name and face known to millions. He pictured the crowd cheering, the commentators praising his skills. He saw himself standing in the ring, his hand raised in victory. But for now, that was just a dream. Damon knew that he had to focus on the present, on the fight ahead. He had to stay calm, stay focused, and trust in his training. As the sun began to set, casting a warm orange glow over the alley, Damon felt a sense of peace wash over him. He knew that tomorrow would be a big day, but for now, he just relaxed, enjoying the quiet moment with his mother. The sound of her heavy breathing, the creaking of the old boxes beneath her feet, the distant hum of traffic, it was all so familiar, so comforting. Damon closed his eyes, letting the sounds wash over him, and let himself drift off into a state of calm, focused anticipation. Night fell swiftly, casting a dark shadow over the alley. Damon and his mother succumbed to exhaustion, their bodies surrendering to the allure of sleep. The sound of their gentle snores filled the air, a soothing melody that echoed off the walls. Morning arrived with ease, the sun peeking through the narrow alleyway like a curious eye. Damon stirred, his body stretching as he sat up. He gently shook his mother awake. "Mom." Her eyes fluttered open, bleary and unfocused. She gazed at her son, her voice laced with sleep. "Damon, what's wrong?" Damon's voice was low and even. "I'm leaving. I thought I should let you know. I'll be back late." His mother's eyes drooped, her lids heavy with fatigue. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Okay, be safe. Break bones." A faint smile played on her lips as she drifted off to sleep once more. Damon watched her for a moment, his expression softening. He knew she was still tired from the previous day's exercise. He turned his attention to the large bin behind which he had stashed his gear. He moved quietly, not wanting to disturb his mother's sleep. As he reached behind the bin, his fingers closed around the plastic bag containing his gear. The plastic crinkled softly as he pulled it out, the sound echoing through the stillness of the alley. Damon's hands moved deftly, unzipping the bag and revealing the contents. The gloves and mouthguard lay nestled within, their sleek surfaces glinting in the morning light. Damon's eyes narrowed, his focus intensifying as he prepared for the fight ahead. Damon emerged from the alley, his feet carrying him away from the familiar surroundings. He broke into a run, his legs pumping furiously as he devoured the distance. However, he quickly realized that running wasn't the best idea. His stamina wasn't exactly top-notch, and he needed to preserve his energy for the fight ahead. He slowed to a walk, his feet falling into a steady rhythm on the pavement. The walk was surprisingly pleasant, with a gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the trees and the warm sun casting a comforting glow over everything. People passed him on the street, but unlike before, he didn't bump into anyone. He felt a sense of calm wash over him, his nerves steadying as he approached his destination. As he turned the corner onto the street where the house was located, Damon's heart began to beat a little faster. He could feel a thrill of excitement building in his chest, his senses heightening as he took in the sights and sounds around him. The houses seemed to loom larger, their windows and doors taking on a sense of importance. Finally, he arrived at the house, its backyard the venue for the fight. Damon's eyes locked onto the building, his mind focusing intently on the task ahead. He couldn't help but smile, a sense of determination and anticipation spreading across his face. This was it, the moment he had been training for. He took a deep breath, feeling a sense of readiness wash over him. "Bring it on." Damon entered the house and made his way to the backyard, his eyes scanning the area for any signs of the event. There were a few people milling about, but it seemed that the fight hadn't started yet. He spotted a bench in the corner, partially shaded by a tree, and made his way over. As he approached, he noticed that there were already a few girls sitting on the bench, their ages similar to his. They seemed to be engrossed in their own conversation, but their eyes flicked towards him as he drew near. Damon didn't hesitate, taking a seat beside them on the bench. The girls immediately turned their attention to him, their eyes narrowing as if trying to intimidate him. One of them raised an eyebrow, her gaze lingering on his worn clothes and messy hair. The girls slid away from him, their movements almost synchronized. One of them wrinkled her nose in distaste, whispering creep under her breath. Another chimed in with a soft ew, their voices barely audible but their disdain clear. Damon didn't react, his expression neutral. He wasn't here to make friends or impress anyone, especially not these girls. He had more important things on his mind, like the fight ahead. He settled into the bench, his eyes scanning the surrounding area. The girls' whispers and giggles continued, but Damon tuned them out, focusing on his own thoughts. He wasn't bothered by their behavior, he was used to being ignored or dismissed. His mind was already on the fight, his strategy, and his opponent. Chapter 17, Confrontation. The place was filled with the murmur of conversations, a constant hum of voices that seemed to grow louder. By the minute, Damon remained seated on the bench, his eyes fixed on the ground in front of him. He was aware of the people around him, but he didn't acknowledge their presence. Most of them seemed to be avoiding him, casting curious glances his way before quickly looking away. A group of people approached the bench, their eyes scanning the area before settling on Damon. One of them, a tall, muscular boy with a messy mop of hair, spoke up. "Hey, can you move? We want to sit." Damon didn't lift his head, his gaze remaining fixed on the ground. He pointed to the large empty space beside him, his finger jabbing at the air. "There's space." The boy's voice took on a slightly aggressive tone. "Seems you didn't hear me, I said move." He took a step closer to Damon, his eyes narrowing. Damon's expression remained neutral, his eyes still fixed on the ground. He didn't flinch, didn't react. He simply sat there, his presence seeming to shrink into the background. The boy's friends shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting back and forth between Damon and their friend. One of them placed a hand on the boy's arm, whispering something in his ear. The boy's smirk grew wider as he spoke, his voice dripping with condescension. "Oh, so you're the crackhead Joey said I'm gonna face, huh?" The words hung in the air, a challenge and an insult wrapped in one. Damon's interest was piqued, his gaze locking onto the boy's face. He lifted his head, his breath catching in his throat as he took in the sight of his opponent. The boy's muscles rippled beneath his skin, a testament to his dedication to his physique. Damon's eyes narrowed, his mind working overtime to assess the situation. The boy's face was a map of confidence, his eyes gleaming with a fierce intensity. Damon's gaze met his, and for a moment, they just stared at each other. Damon's expression remained neutral, his eyes giving away nothing. At novelbanat. The boy took a step closer. "What do you want?" Damon asked, his voice firm and even. The boy sneered, his lips curling up in a snarl. "What, you want to go now? Come on, let's do it." He took another step closer, his body language aggressive and confrontational. As he spoke, he pushed Damon, his hands shoving against Damon's chest. Damon stumbled backward, his feet tangling with the bench behind him. He almost tripped, his arms flailing wildly as he struggled to regain his balance. The commotion attracted attention, people's heads turning to see what was happening. The air was electric with tension, the atmosphere charged with anticipation. Damon's eyes never left the boy's face, his gaze locked onto his opponent with an unnerving intensity. The boy's eyes gleamed with excitement, his pupils dilated with adrenaline. The scene was set, the stage primed for a confrontation. The bystanders watched with interest, their voices filled with amusement. "Who's that guy arguing with Matt?" one of them asked, chuckling. "Why start one? I mean, the guy's been popping roids since he came out of the womb," another joked, snickering. The group around them laughed, their voices carrying through the air. "Don't you know, Matt is fighting today?" someone said, grinning. For real. "Damn, well someone's getting their face smashed," another chimed in. The jokes continued, the crowd growing larger as people stopped to watch the commotion. Damon's eyes narrowed, his mind racing with the possibility of a fight. He thought about throwing a punch, but before he could react, someone ran over, inserting themselves between him and Matt. It was Joey, his voice calm and authoritative. "Whoa, hold up boys, let's not start one fight here outside." He placed a hand on each of their chests, pushing them apart. Damon's eyes locked onto Joey's, a mixture of frustration and relief washing over him. He picked up his plastic bag, moving back to create some distance between himself and Matt. The crowd began to disperse, their attention span waning now that the confrontation had been diffused. Joey turned to Matt, his voice low and even. "Let's save it for the ring, okay?" Matt nodded, his expression still aggressive, but his body language easing slightly. Damon watched them, his mind still racing with the possibility of a fight. He knew it was coming, and he was ready. The air was thick with tension, the atmosphere charged with anticipation. The fight was looming, and Damon could feel it in his bones. He took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving Joey's face. It was time to focus. Joey's expression transformed, his serious demeanor giving way to a jovial grin. "Well, fortunately for you guys, you're the ones who get to open this tournament," he said, his voice booming through the air. The crowd laughed and cheered, their excitement palpable. Joey turned to the onlookers, his eyes scanning the sea of faces. "Okay, guys, let's move around the fences as usual. We have 8 fights, so let's begin the first fight, shall we?" The crowd surged forward, their footsteps thundering against the ground. Damon watched as they formed a semicircle around the makeshift ring, their faces eager with anticipation. Joey moved aside, his attention focused on a girl who was standing nearby, chatting with him. Damon's eyes narrowed, his mind working overtime to place her. She wasn't the same girl he had seen last time, the one who had been with Joey. He shrugged, his thoughts fleeting. It seemed Joey was around. The girl's dark hair cascaded down her back, her eyes sparkling with amusement as she talked to Joey. She was one of the watchers. Joey's voice cut through the noise, his words clear and concise. "All right, let's get this started. Our first fight is between Matt and Damon." Damon's eyes locked onto Matt's, his mind focused on the task ahead. It was time to put everything on the line. Chapter 18, David and Goliath I. Matt was already standing in the makeshift octagon ring, his eyes fixed intently on Damon as he prepared for the fight. Damon pulled out a mouthguard from his plastic bag and inserted it into his mouth, the rubbery texture conforming to his teeth. He then retrieved a pair of new gloves, their bright color and sleek design drawing attention from the crowd. As Damon began to put on the gloves, the onlookers exchanged skeptical glances. "Does he think this is some pro match or something?" Someone whispered, their voice laced with amusement. "Well, it's not like he's going to win, so let him put on his show," another person chimed in, their tone dripping with condescension. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, their voices filled with a mix of curiosity and ridicule. Damon's choice of gear was unusual, as most fights in this setting didn't involve such elaborate equipment. The gloves, in particular, seemed out of place, their padding and wrist support a far cry from the thin, worn-out gloves or old boxing gloves typically used in these informal matches. As Damon finished securing the gloves, he gave his hands a few test flexes, the leather creaking softly. His eyes never left Matt's face, his gaze burning with a quiet intensity. Damon stepped into the ring, his eyes scanning the makeshift enclosure. His shirt was baggy, proof to his skinny physique. As he entered the ring, a wave of nervousness washed over him. His heart rate quickened, and his palms grew moist. He recognized the sensation, acknowledging the fear that came with knowing what lay ahead. Yet, he controlled his breathing, drawing slow, deliberate inhales through his nose and exhaling through his mouth. "Okay, so fight." Joey's voice boomed, echoing off the surrounding fences. Damon's gaze snapped to Matt, his opponent, as he assumed his Muay Thai stance. He spread his feet shoulder-width apart, aligning his hips and shoulders. His right foot slid back, weight transferring onto his left leg, while his hands rose to guard his face in a binocular shape, resembling goggles. His fingers were spread, and his palms faced outward, protecting his head and face from incoming strikes. Matt snorted, approaching Damon with a mix of amusement and disdain. "Come on, bish, let's do this," he taunted, his voice dripping with condescension. The air was heavy with tension as the two fighters faced off, their bodies poised for combat. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, their excitement palpable. Damon's focus remained fixed on Matt, his eyes locked onto his opponents, his mind centered on the task ahead. The two fighters circled each other, their eyes locked in a fierce stare. Matt, eager to close the distance, took a step forward, but Damon was quick to react. With a swift motion, he threw a low right kick aiming for Matt's thigh. The kick connected with a solid thud, the impact resonating through the air. Matt smirked, seemingly unfazed by the kick. He continued to move closer, his eyes fixed on Damon's face. Damon, anticipating the incoming attack, tried to move out of the way, but Matt's punch was too fast. It grazed Damon's face, the knuckles barely missing his nose. The punch still landed, however, and Damon felt a surge of pain. But Damon didn't waste the opportunity. Matt had put his whole body into the punch, leaving himself open to a counterattack. Damon seized the moment, throwing a sloppy hook with his right hand. The punch was far from perfect, but it still landed squarely on Matt's face. The impact was audible, and Matt's head snapped back slightly. Damon's eyes locked onto Matt's, sensing a shift in his demeanor. The punch had landed, and Matt's expression betrayed a flicker of annoyance. The crowd's collective "oh" echoed through the air, a symphony of surprise and excitement. Damon's small frame stumbled backward, his feet struggling to maintain balance as Matt's push sent him off kilter. Matt's massive body loomed closer, his front kick aimed squarely at Damon's midsection. Damon's instincts screamed at him to avoid the kick at all costs. He stumbled back further, exaggerating his movement to evade the kick's full force. The fence behind him pressed into his back, a cold, unforgiving barrier that halted his retreat. Matt closed in, his eyes blazing with intensity. Damon's Muay Thai stance began to falter, his movements becoming sloppy and uncoordinated. His training was limited, and the pressure of the fight was taking its toll. He shifted to the side, his feet shuffling awkwardly as he tried to regain his footing. Damon's heart beat fast, struggling to maintain his composure. At Novelbanat. Matt's presence was overwhelming, his sheer size and strength making Damon feel like a fragile, vulnerable target. The fence behind him seemed to be closing in, trapping him in a desperate bid for survival. Damon launched a front kick, aiming for Matt's stomach, hoping to push him back and create some distance. But Matt was too quick, and his massive hands closed around Damon's foot like a vice. Damon's eyes widened as Matt pulled him forward, his body stretching out like a rubber band. Damon's hands grasped the fence behind him, his fingers digging into the metal as he tried to anchor himself. But Matt's strength was too much, and Damon felt himself being pulled off balance. He kicked out with his legs, trying to land a hit, but Matt's grip was too strong. Damon's chest was exposed, and Matt's face was inches from his, their hot breath mingling in the air. Damon's kicks kept missing Matt's face, but he managed to land a few glancing blows on his chest. The crowd erupted into cheers and laughter, their jokes and jeers filling the air. "Hey, someone open up and let him out," one of the watchers yelled, chuckling. "Yeah, he's stuck." Another voice chimed in, as the crowd continued to mock Damon's predicament. Damon's face reddened with effort, his muscles straining as he tried to break free from Matt's grip. But Matt's hold was unyielding, his fingers wrapped tightly around Damon's foot like a trap. The fence creaked and groaned under Damon's weight, the metal digging into his back as he struggled to escape. Chapter 19, David and Goliath 2. Damon's fingers screamed in protest as he clung to the fence, his MMA gloves too bulky to fit through the narrow openings. His grip was tenuous at best, his fingers straining to maintain their hold. Panic threatened to overwhelm him, but he forced himself to calm down, to think clearly. He gazed straight at Matt, who was trying to avoid his flailing foot while still holding onto the other leg. Damon's eyes locked onto Matt's, his focus intensifying. He realized that his wild kicking was getting him nowhere, so he changed tactics. With a sudden burst of strength, Damon pulled the leg that Matt was holding. Matt didn't expect the move, and his grip faltered for a split second. Damon seized the opportunity, pulling his free leg back and unleashing a powerful kick. His heel shot forward, connecting with a sickening crunch on the bridge of Matt's nose. The impact sent a shockwave through the air, the sound of the kick echoing off the surrounding fences. Matt's head snapped back, his eyes widening in surprise and pain. Damon's leg rebounded from the kick, his foot tingling from the force of the impact. He hung there, suspended by his fingers, his chest heaving with exertion. The crowd's cheers and chants grew louder, their voices a deafening roar in Damon's ears. Matt released Damon's leg, stumbling backward as his eyes widened in shock. Damon let go of the fence, his fingers leaving behind deep indentations in the metal. The marks were proof to the desperation of his grip, the ridges of the fence etched into his skin like a temporary tattoo. Matt's voice echoed through the air, a loud, anguished fuck. That sent a ripple through the crowd. He dropped to his knees, his hands grasping for his nose as if trying to stem the flow of blood. Damon watched, his eyes fixed on Matt's face as he touched his nose and then looked at his hand in horror. The blood was a deep, rich red, glistening in the light. It dripped down Matt's chin, onto his chest and onto the ground, forming a small puddle that seemed to spread with an eerie slowness. The crowd took a collective step back, their voices dying down as they took in the scene before them. Damon saw his chance, his mind racing with the possibilities. He could press his advantage, try to finish the fight with a flourish. Or he could play it safe, try to wear Matt down with careful, precise strikes. The choice was his, and his alone. Damon cursed under his breath, "Fuck it," as he charged forward, closing the distance between him and Matt. But in that moment of hesitation, Matt had managed to regain his footing, his eyes blazing with determination as he stood up. Damon's eyes widened in panic as he saw Matt rise, his mind racing with the sudden change in circumstances. He stared at Matt's legs, his face hardening as he focused on his target. With a fierce battle cry, Damon launched himself at Matt, his legs pumping furiously as he built up momentum. His foot connected with Matt's inner thigh, the impact sending a shockwave through the air. The sound of the kick was like a loud crack, the force of it causing Matt to lose his footing once again. He let out a quiet, short scream, his voice strained as he struggled to maintain his balance. Matt's legs slid out from under him, his body stretching into an involuntary lunge. Damon saw another chance, his eyes locking onto Matt's exposed head. He quickly took a step back, his weight transferring onto his back leg as he loaded up for the kick. The crowd held its collective breath, their voices whispering in anticipation. "Wait, is he going to kick his head?" Someone whispered, the words hanging in the air like a challenge. Damon's face was a mask of focus, his eyes blazing with intensity. He threw the kick with every ounce of strength he had, his foot connecting with Matt's temple in a sickening crunch. The sound of the kick was like a loud crack, the impact sending a shockwave through the air. Matt's head snapped to the side, his eyes rolling back in his head as he crumpled to the ground. The crowd erupted into chaos, their voices screaming in a mix of horror and excitement. Damon stood over Matt, his chest heaving with exertion, his eyes fixed on his opponent's prone form. Damon felt the primal urge to mount Matt and unleash a flurry of punches, to continue the punishment until his opponent was nothing more than a battered, broken shell. But just as he was about to act on his instincts, he felt a hand grasp his shoulder, pulling him back. "Whoa, he's down, dude, stop." A voice shouted in his ear. Damon turned to see a random guy, his face a blur, his words a distant echo. He nodded, his breathing slowing, as he hit shoulders with the guy in a gesture of acknowledgement. As he stepped out of the cage, Damon's eyes scanned the crowd, his mind still reeling from the adrenaline-fueled fight. Joey approached him, a wide grin spreading across his face. "Damn, man, I didn't know you could fight like that," Joey exclaimed, patting Damon's back. "Last week, you got your ass handed to you. Now you're kicking one." Joey's words were a distant hum, a background noise that barely registered in Damon's mind. His thoughts were still consumed by the fight, his body craving more. He wanted to hurt more of them, to feel the rush of power and control that came with victory. Damon's eyes narrowed, his gaze scanning the crowd for his next opponent. His heart still raced, his fists still clenched as he walked away from the cage, ready to take on the next challenger. As Damon walked towards the bench, his eyes fixed on the row of seats, the people sitting there suddenly shifted uncomfortably, their bodies tensing as they gazed up at him. At Novelbanadat. They exchanged nervous glances, their faces pale, before quickly scrambling to move out of his way. The bench creaked as they hastily vacated their seats, their footsteps echoing through the air as they distanced themselves from Damon. The sound of their murmured conversations and shuffling feet filled the space, a symphony of avoidance. Damon's gaze swept across the now empty bench, his eyes lingering on the vacant seats before he finally sat down. Chapter 20, Quest and BJJ. As Damon's breathing slowed and his mind cleared, he gazed out towards the cage, but his view was obstructed by the crowd of people standing around him. He had no concept of time, unsure how long he had been sitting on the bench, lost in thought. When he finally stood up, his joints creaked in protest, a reminder of the intense physical exertion he had just endured. As he stretched his arms over his head, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. He had fought a whole match without sustaining any significant injuries, just a minor graze on his face from a stray punch. A small, wry smile crept onto his face as he thought about it. Just last week, he had been brutally beaten, left sleeping on the grass, his body battered and bruised. But now, he had emerged victorious, his skills honed, his confidence boosted. Damon's eyes narrowed, his focus intensifying as he thought about the system that had helped him achieve this transformation. He felt a deep sense of gratitude towards it, knowing that he still had so much to learn, so much to improve. He was determined to utilize the system to its full potential, to hone his skills, to become the best fighter he could be. As Damon moved closer to the ring, he navigated through the crowd to get a better view of the fight. What he saw made his eyes widen in concern. One fighter was mounting the other, throwing punches with abandon. Damon scanned the area, wondering why no one was intervening to stop the fight. Just as he was about to step in himself, a figure emerged from the crowd. The moment the boy entered the cage, the atmosphere changed. The murmurs of the crowd ceased, and the only sound was the thud of the fighters' punches. The boy, who appeared to be around Damon's age, quickly moved to separate the fighters. But before he could even react, a punch flew towards him, connecting with a loud bam. The boy crumpled to the ground, unconscious. The fighter, still fueled by adrenaline, clicked his tongue in annoyance and stepped out of the ring, leaving the boy lying there. The crowd remained silent, shocked by the sudden turn of events. Damon's eyes narrowed as he took in the scene. He could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the unspoken rules that govern this world. As Damon turned to walk away from the ring, the sound of his own footsteps echoed in his ears. He didn't feel compelled to intervene or play hero, not when it could put him in harm's way for someone he didn't even know. His eyes scanned the crowd, taking in the sea of faces, before focusing on the path ahead. Just as he was about to reach his bench, a sudden ding resonated in his mind, like a sharp, metallic ping. The familiar blue interface materialized before his eyes, its bright hue stark against the duller tones of the surroundings. Damon's gaze locked onto the text, his mind processing the words with a mix of curiosity and wariness. Quest issued. Win all the fights. Reward, 10 coins. Punishment. Note: if you can't even win against untrained fighters with your knowledge, then give up. He felt a shiver run down his spine as he read the message, his heart rate increasing slightly. The uncertainty of the punishment was unsettling, but the promise of 10 coins was tantalizing. Damon quickened his pace, his feet carrying him swiftly back to the bench. He sat down, his eyes fixed intently on the blue interface, devouring every detail. The sounds of the crowd receded into the background as he focused on the quest. Damon took a deep breath, feeling the air fill his lungs, and gazed up to see a shadow looming over him. The figure's presence was imposing, casting a dark silhouette against the bright surroundings. As he looked up, he saw it was the same guy who had pulled him out of the cage earlier, his rugged features and imposing build unmistakable. "It's your turn again," Joey said to call you, the guy said, his voice deep and firm, before turning to leave without another word. He felt a sense of determination wash over him. He had to win this fight, and the next, if he didn't want to face some mysterious punishment. The thought sent a shiver down his spine, but he pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. He made his way to the cage again, the warm sun beating down on him, its peak now directly overhead. The light illuminated the entire area, casting a golden glow over the crowd and the fighters. When he entered the cage, people cheered, their voices a deafening roar that echoed off the metal walls. "At Novelbanadat." Damon smiled slightly, feeling a sense of excitement and nervousness build up inside him. Maybe this wasn't so bad after all, he thought, as he began to prepare for the fight ahead. Damon's eyes locked onto the figure entering the cage, his gaze narrowing as he took in the details. The guy was almost his size, but slightly bigger, with a lean, athletic build that spoke of healthy skinny, unlike Damon's own unhealthy skinny frame. He raised an eyebrow as he noticed the guy was shirtless, his chest and stomach on full display. Damon didn't understand why someone would choose to fight without clothes. It would only make the impact of the hits more painful, and there wasn't any rule against wearing clothes. He shrugged his shoulders, a small smirk playing on his lips. He was eager to try out his Brazilian jiu-jitsu skills, and he knew that he might fail a couple of times, but he was confident in his endurance. Damon lowered his back, his right foot leading, and his hands up in a defensive position, attempting to protect his face. However, his stance looked awkward and unpolished, like an amateurish imitation of some trying out a move home after watching a movie. The onlookers couldn't help but notice his strange stance, and one of them, a guy holding a beer bottle, jeered loudly. "What the fuck is this guy doing, karate or something? Damn." He slurred, his voice dripping with disdain. Everything felt unfamiliar, like he was navigating uncharted territory, but he was determined to experiment and learn. The sound of the jeering crowd, the feeling of his own ragged breathing, and the sight of his opponent's confident smirk all blended together to create a sense of unease. Chapter 21, The Brawl begins. The air was filled with excitement as the crowd's chant of "Fight! Fight! Fight!" reached a fever pitch. Damon's eyes locked onto his opponent, his gaze burning with intensity. He saw the faintest glimmer of overconfidence in his opponent's eyes, a slight smirk playing on his lips. Damon's jaw clenched, his mind racing with the desire to end this fight quickly. His opponent stood tall, his feet shoulder-width apart in a classic boxing stance. His hands were wrapped tightly in gloves, his fingers curled into fists. The sun beat down on his shirtless torso, highlighting the lean muscles rippling beneath his skin. Damon's eyes narrowed, his focus intensifying as he took in every detail of his opponent's stance. He noticed the way his opponent's weight was evenly distributed between both legs, the slight bounce in his knees as he prepared to spring into action. The crowd's roar grew louder, a deafening cacophony of cheers and shouts that threatened to consume Damon whole. He tuned it out, his senses honed to the singular task at hand. His opponent's eyes flashed with excitement, his pupils dilating as he began to circle Damon. Damon's breathing slowed, his heart rate dropping as he entered a state of complete focus. He was aware of every muscle in his body, every fiber of his being tensed and ready to spring into action. Damon's legs propelled him forward, his feet carrying him swiftly across the grass as he attempted to close the distance between himself and his opponent. But before he could even get within arm's length, a straight punch shot out, connecting with a loud thud on his chin. The impact sent a shockwave through Damon's skull, his teeth rattling from the force of the blow. His head snapped back, his eyes widening in surprise as he struggled to maintain his balance. But to the amazement of the onlookers, Damon didn't crumple to the ground. Instead, he stumbled backward, his hands flying up to his face as if to shield himself from further damage. The punch had been a wake-up call, a harsh reminder that Damon was in over his head. He didn't know what he was doing, and he shouldn't be risking his safety like this. Panic set in, his mind racing with the realization that he needed to protect himself. Damon's hands covered his face, his fingers interlocking as he tried to shield his nose, mouth, and eyes from the incoming blows. His elbows tucked in close to his body, his shoulders hunching up in a defensive posture. The opponent's eyes lit up with excitement, his face twisted in a snarl as he sensed Damon's vulnerability. He unleashed a flurry of punches, each one aimed at Damon's head and body with precision and power. Damon's hands remained raised, his arms absorbing the impact of each blow, but he knew he couldn't keep this up for much longer. The punches were coming too fast, too hard, and he was running out of options. As he backed away, his feet scraping against the grass, Damon felt the cold metal of the cage against his back. He was trapped, wedged between the aggressive fighter and the unforgiving steel. The opponent saw his chance and closed in, his fists flying in a blur of motion. Damon's eyes widened as he tried to track the punches, his head jerking from side to side as he attempted to avoid the blows. The sound of flesh hitting flesh filled the air, a sickening thud that echoed off the cage walls. Damon's arms felt like lead, his muscles screaming in protest as he tried to block the punches. Sweat dripped down his face, stinging his eyes as he struggled to maintain his defense. His breathing was ragged, his chest heaving with exertion as he fought to stay upright. The opponent's punches showed no signs of slowing, each one landing with precision and power. Damon's vision began to blur, his senses reeling from the relentless onslaught. Damon's hand shot out, his fingers stretching like tentacles, searching for any part of his opponent's body to grasp. His palm finally made contact with the guy's sweaty back, and he pulled him in, his arm wrapping around the guy's neck like a vice. The opponent's punches ceased, his arms trapped against his body as Damon held him in a tight clinch. The guy's face was inches from Damon's, their noses almost touching as they stood there, locked in an awkward embrace. The crowd erupted into laughter and jeers, their voices echoing off the cage walls. "What the heck is going on? I came here to watch people fight, not see men hug while sweaty," someone yelled, prompting a chorus of guffaws and snickers. Even the opponent couldn't help but curse, his voice muffled against Damon's shoulder. "What the fuck, dude, stop hugging me," he growled, trying to wriggle free, but Damon held tight. As they stood there, swaying slightly, their feet slid on the grass, their bodies locked in a strange, intimate dance. Damon's hand remained clamped on the guy's neck, his other hand slipping under the guy's arm, his fingers digging into the guy's side. The air was thick with tension, the only sound the heavy breathing of the two fighters, their chests heaving against each other. The crowd's laughter and catcalls receded into the background, replaced by the sound of grunting and scuffling feet. Damon's face was set in a fierce grimace, his eyes fixed intently on the guy's face, his jaw clenched in determination. He knew what he was doing, this was a clinch, a tactical move to neutralize his opponent's offense and create an opening for a takedown. As they stood there, locked in their awkward embrace, the outcome of the fight hung in the balance, waiting to see who would emerge victorious from this strange, sweaty hug. Damon's knee jerked upward, his leg unfolding like a coiled spring as he aimed a precise strike at the opponent's side. The impact was loud and sharp, a sickening thud that echoed through the air. At novel. The opponent's body flinched, his muscles tensing as the knee connected with his ribcage. A faint grimace crossed his face, his eyes widening in surprise and pain. Damon's knee seemed to sink into the opponent's side, the force of the blow compressing the flesh and muscle beneath. The sound of the impact was followed by a faint crunch, the sound of bones and cartilage protesting the sudden trauma. The opponent's breath caught in his throat, his lungs momentarily stunned by the blow. His mouth opened, a faint gasp escaping his lips as he struggled to draw air. Damon's leg recoiled, his knee returning to its original position, but the damage was done. The opponent's body began to sag, his strength waning as the pain and shock took hold. Chapter 22. The Power of the Clinch. Damon's arms remained wrapped around his opponent's body, his hands still clasped together at the base of the guy's neck. He felt the opponent's muscles relax, his body sagging slightly after the knee strike. The crowd's jeers and catcalls grew louder, their voices echoing off the cage walls. "Come on, knuckleheads. Fight like real men. Even I can do that," someone yelled, prompting a chorus of laughter and snickers. Damon tuned out the crowd's taunts, his focus solely on his opponent's body language. He felt the guy's weight shift, his legs trembling slightly as he struggled to maintain his balance. The opponent's eyes darted back and forth, his pupils constricting as he tried to think of a way to escape the clinch. His mouth was open, his lips curled into a snarl as he struggled to catch his breath. At novel. Damon's grip remained firm, his arms like a vice around his opponent's body. He could feel the guy's heart racing, his pulse pounding against Damon's forearm. The crowd's laughter and jeers receded into the background, replaced by the sound of grunting and scuffling feet. Damon's feet slid slightly on the grass, his weight shifting as he adjusted his grip. Damon's knee jerked upward again, connecting with a loud pitch that echoed through the air. The impact was louder and more forceful than before, causing his opponent's body to shiver and tremble. The opponent's grip on Damon's arms began to slip, his fingers loosening as he struggled to maintain his hold. But in a sudden surge of adrenaline, he tried to rally, his face contorted in a snarl. "I'll show you how it feels to be kicked," he growled, his voice strained in pain. He tried to speak, but the words came out in a ragged gasp, his breathing labored. With a sudden burst of energy, he threw his own knee strike, aiming for Damon's side. But unfortunately, it was the same side where Damon's arm was wrapped under his opponent's, and Damon caught the leg easily. Damon's hand closed around the opponent's calf, his fingers digging deep into the muscle. He held the leg in place, his arm still clamped around the opponent's neck with his other hand. The opponent's eyes widened in shock and pain, his face reddening as he struggled to free himself. But Damon held firm, his grip unyielding. Damon's face remained expressionless, his eyes fixed intently on his opponent. He didn't say a single word, his silence a stark contrast to the opponent's ragged gasps and grunts. Damon's body felt warm with exertion, his muscles tense and strained. He could feel the sweat dripping down his face, his skin slick with moisture. Damon's fingers dug deeper into the opponent's neck, his grip tightening as he sensed his opponent's strength waning. Damon's eyes scanned the position they were in, his mind racing with the possibilities. He saw the opponent's leg in his hand, the guy's neck trapped in his other hand, and knew it was time to make his move. With a swift and precise motion, Damon lifted the opponent's leg up, causing him to lose balance. The guy's eyes widened in surprise as he felt himself being lifted off the ground. Damon moved around, his feet shuffling on the grass, causing the opponent to start hopping on one leg. The guy's arms flailed wildly, trying to regain balance, but Damon held tight, his grip unyielding. The opponent's face contorted in a mixture of pain and fear as he realized he was going down. Damon's hands remained locked in place, his fingers digging deep into the guy's neck and leg. As the opponent hopped, Damon pushed through, using his body weight to drive them both down to the ground. The impact was loud and forceful, the sound of their bodies hitting the grass echoing through the air. The opponent's back hit the ground with a thud, his body bouncing slightly from the impact. He cried out in pain, his voice hoarse and ragged. Damon's body followed, his chest pressing down on the opponent's, his weight pinning him to the ground. The air was forced out of the opponent's lungs, his body struggling to catch a breath. Damon began to mount his opponent, carefully positioning himself to avoid being caught in a leg lock. He sat on the guy's stomach, his weight pinning him to the ground. Damon's fists clenched, He started throwing punch after punch, each one landing with a loud thud. The opponent's arms flailed wildly, his hands slapping against Damon's arms as he tried to defend himself. His face contorted in pain, he screamed, "I quit. Stop." At the top of his lungs. Damon paused, his fists hovering above the opponent's face. He looked up at the crowd, his eyes scanning the sea of faces to see if they had heard the opponent's submission. The crowd's murmurs and shouts confirmed they had. What the hell is wrong with the guy? Why quit? He still had a chance of winning, someone in the crowd yelled. What do you mean chance? He was getting battered on the ground. Another spectator countered. The crowd erupted into a heated argument, their voices echoing off the cage walls. Damon dismounted, standing up, his chest heaving with exhaustion. His lungs burned, his muscles ached, and his body screamed for rest. He was tired, he wanted nothing but sleep, but there was still one more match to go, the final. As he stood there, his eyes scanned the crowd, his gaze lingering on the faces of the spectators. He felt a sense of relief wash over him, knowing he had won the match, but his body told a different story. His legs trembled, his arms felt like lead, and his head spun with fatigue. He took a deep breath, his chest expanding, and let it out slowly, trying to calm his racing heart. Damon's gaze fell upon the guy on the ground, his eyes scanning the opponent's body. He noticed that the right side of the guy's torso was a deep shade of red, a clear indication of the impact from the knee strikes. The skin was red, and Damon could see the faint outline of his own kneecap imprinted on the guy's side. The sight of the redness seemed to confirm the effectiveness of Damon's strategy. He felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that his knee strikes had landed precisely and with significant force. The redness would likely turn into a nasty bruise, proof to the intensity of their battle. Chapter 23, Stockton Brothers. Damon watched the next match unfold before his eyes. At Novelbanadat. The guy who had knocked out the kid in the previous fight, a towering figure with a menacing scowl, stepped into the cage with a confident swagger. But his confidence was short-lived, as his opponent, a lean and agile fighter named Tim, proved to be a formidable foe. The bell rang, and the two fighters began to circle each other, their eyes locked in a fierce stare. The crowd was on the edge of their seats, sensing that this was going to be a fight to remember. The first punch was thrown by the towering fighter, a powerful jab aimed straight at Tim's face. But Tim was quick, dodging the punch with ease and countering with a swift kick to the stomach. The towering fighter doubled over, gasping for breath, as Tim seized the opportunity to land a series of rapid-fire punches. The crowd erupted into cheers as Tim's fists flew through the air, each one landing with precision and force. The towering fighter stumbled backward, his eyes wide with shock as Tim continued to press the attack. Finally, with a devastating combination of punches and kicks, Tim sent the towering fighter crashing to the ground. The crowd went wild, cheering and chanting Tim's name as he stood victorious over his defeated opponent. Damon watched in awe, his mind racing with the implications of what he had just seen. He had heard people talking around that Tim's brother was friends with the Diego brothers, whoever they were. He didn't know much about them, but he had a feeling that they were not people to be trifled with. Damon gazed at Tim, who was leaning against the cage, his chest heaving slightly as he caught his breath. Tim's eyes seemed to gleam with a quiet confidence, his expression serene as he surveyed the crowd. Damon noticed the way Tim's hair was damp with sweat, his skin glistening with a fine sheen of moisture. The air around them was thick with the smell of sweat and adrenaline, the sound of the crowd's murmurs and the distant thud of music creating a constant hum of background noise. As Damon watched, Tim pushed off from the cage and began to pace back and forth, his movements fluid and relaxed. His eyes never left Damon's face, his gaze piercing as he seemed to size him up. Damon felt a shiver run down his spine as their eyes met, his heart beating just a little bit faster. "Come on, I beat the last fighters, what's wrong with next?" Damon said, trying to sound braver than he felt. His voice was steady, but he could feel the tension building inside him. Tim's expression didn't change, but he nodded slightly, his eyes never leaving Damon's face. "Let's do this," he said, his voice low and even. The crowd around them began to stir, sensing that the next match was about to begin. Damon stood up and walked to the octagon cage. He looked straight at the entrance, ready to face his next opponent. As he walked, Damon adjusted his gloves. He tightened the straps around his wrists, making sure they were secure. Next, Damon put in his mouthguard. It felt comfortable in his mouth, and he bit down to make sure it was in place. When he looked up, Damon saw Tim standing opposite him. Tim's eyes were fixed intently on Damon's face, and his gloves had the UFA logo on them. Damon felt a shiver run down his spine as he stepped into the octagon. The cool, damp grass beneath his feet was a contrast to the rough gloves on his hands. The cage loomed above him, making him feel trapped. The air was thick with tension, and Damon could smell the sweat and adrenaline. Damon felt the crowd's eyes on him, watching his every move. He took a deep breath and focused on the moment. The people outside the cage began to murmur, their voices filled with uncertainty. "Hey, who do you think will win?" someone asked, their tone laced with doubt. The question hung in the air, like a challenge waiting to be answered. Their friend, standing with arms crossed, responded with a confident smirk. "What's that question?" "It's obviously Tim. He's probably been training with the Diego brothers, so I'm sure he can beat this crackhead." The words spilled out of their mouth like a rapid-fire sequence, each one landing with a sense of conviction. The person who asked the question raised an eyebrow, their expression skeptical. "I don't know, man. But we'll see." Their voice trailed off, like a slow-moving stream, as they gazed into the cage. The friend, still confident, shot back with a grin. "Wanna bet on it?" The words were like a dare, thrown down like a gauntlet, waiting to be picked up. But the person hesitated, their eyes darting back and forth, like a trapped animal searching for an escape. "Nope," they replied finally, their voice barely above a whisper. Joey walked into the cage, his voice booming across the lawn. "Okay everyone, this match deserves a proper introduction, it's the final for today." He paused for dramatic effect, surveying the crowd gathered around the makeshift cage. His eyes landed on the cage, but he hesitated, realizing he didn't see any color designating the corners. Blue corner," he exclaimed, making it up on the spot. The crowd chuckled at the improvisation. "We have Tim," Joey announced, his voice echoing off the surrounding houses. The crowd erupted into applause, some people still chatting and placing last-minute bets. Tim stood calmly in the cage, his eyes fixed intently on his opponent. Joey turned to the other side of the cage. "On the red side, corner, we have Damon." The crowd applauded again, their voices and whistles filling the evening air. Damon stood tall, his eyes locked on Tim with a fierce determination. Joey concluded the introduction with a flourish. "Okay dudes, this is it. Want the cash? Then get on to fighting." He quickly exited the cage, leaving the two fighters to face off. Chapter 24, The Mind Game. A teep kick, also known as a push kick in Muay Thai, is a straight, pushing kick typically aimed at the opponent's midsection or legs. Damon adopted the traditional Muay Thai stance, his feet shoulder-width apart and his hands up in a guard position. He gazed across the makeshift cage at Tim, who was standing with a relaxed smile on his face. Tim's hands were down by his sides, his arms loose and casual. Damon's instincts told him that Tim's stance was deliberate, a ploy to lull him into a false sense of security. He decided to test Tim's defenses, closing in with a cautious step. The two fighters met in the middle of the cage, their eyes locked in a fierce stare. Damon threw a straight jab, his fist shooting out in a swift, precise motion. But instead of blocking or countering, Tim simply took a step back, his smile never wavering. It was as if he was saying, "Is that the best you've got?" Damon felt a surge of uncertainty. Was Tim trying to psych him out, or was he genuinely underestimating him? The crowd seemed to sense the tension, their murmurs growing louder, this time, not making any jokes. Damon's eyes narrowed, his focus intensifying. He knew he had to keep his cool and wait for the perfect moment to strike. But Tim's relaxed demeanor was unnerving, making him wonder if he was in over his head. At novel banadat. His mind raced, analyzing every movement, every breath of his opponent. Tim's relaxed posture was a puzzle. Damon knew there had to be more to it than simple overconfidence. Tim finally moved, his feet shuffling lightly as he closed the distance between them. Damon held his ground, hands still in the traditional Muay Thai guard, ready to defend. Tim threw a jab, a quick, snapping punch aimed at Damon's face. Damon managed to slip the jab, leaning slightly to the side, but his counter, an instinctual right hook, was too slow. Tim effortlessly weaved out of the way, his movements fluid and seemingly effortless. Damon felt a twinge of frustration, realizing that while he knew the techniques, his execution was still lacking precision. Tim kept the pressure on, following up with a quick 1-2 combination. The first punch landed softly on Damon's guard, but the second, a left cross, slipped through, catching Damon on the cheek. The impact was light, but it was enough to make Damon realize he couldn't afford to be passive. Damon responded with a teep kick, aiming to push Tim back and create some distance. His foot shot out, but the kick lacked the snap and power needed to make it effective. Tim sidestepped with ease, his footwork showing the influence of countless hours spent training with the said Diego brothers, but also a touch of inexperience that made him seem almost playful. Damon tried to reset, planting his feet firmly on the ground, but Tim was already on him. He ducked low, his shoulders rolling as he closed the distance and came up with a right uppercut, aiming for Damon's jaw. Damon saw it coming and managed to block it with his left forearm, but the force still rattled him, making him take a step back. Tim pressed the advantage, switching levels with a low kick aimed at Damon's lead leg. The kick connected, sending a jolt of pain through Damon's calf, but he gritted his teeth and fired back with a straight right. The punch landed on Tim's chest, but it was more of a push than a strike, lacking the power to do real damage. Tim grinned, a glint of mischief in his eyes. He was enjoying the fight, playing with Damon like a cat toying with a mouse. Damon knew he couldn't let this continue, he had to find a way to turn the tide. Drawing on his training, Damon feinted a jab, then quickly stepped forward with a powerful knee strike, aiming for Tim's midsection. This time, he committed fully to the move, putting all his weight into it. The knee connected, sinking into Tim's abdomen with a satisfying thud. Tim grunted, his body folding slightly from the impact, and Damon felt a surge of confidence. But Tim wasn't done. He recovered quickly, slipping out to the side and throwing a quick overhand right. The punch grazed Damon's temple, just enough to disorient him for a moment. Before Damon could react, Tim followed up with a Stockton slap, a wide, open-handed strike that cracked against Damon's cheek, more a show of dominance than a damaging blow. The crowd erupted in cheers, recognizing the signature move. Damn, he really has been training with Nathaniel. The slap stung Damon's pride more than his face, but he knew better than to let it rattle him. He shifted back, resetting his stance, and tried to shake off the growing frustration. Tim was fast, unpredictable, and clearly skilled, but he was also giving Damon openings. The problem was, Damon's inexperience made it difficult to capitalize on them. Tim saw Damon hesitate and took advantage, stepping in with a flurry of punches, quick jabs, crosses, and hooks that kept Damon on the defensive. Damon tried to block and parry, but the punches were coming too fast. One of Tim's hooks slipped past Damon's guard, connecting with his ribs. The pain was sharp, making Damon wince, but he couldn't afford to let it slow him down. Desperate to turn the momentum, Damon threw a wild right hook aiming for Tim's jaw. But the punch was telegraphed, and Tim easily ducked under it. Damon's fist sailed through empty air, leaving him momentarily off balance. Tim saw his chance and pounced, stepping in with a left hook that caught Damon on the chin, sending him stumbling backward. Damon's vision blurred for a moment as he tried to regain his footing. He felt the world tilt. But he fought through the disorientation, knowing that if he went down now, the fight could be over. Tim advanced, his movements almost casual as he closed in for what seemed like the finishing blow. But Damon, driven by sheer determination, managed to plant his feet and throw a desperate teep kick aimed at Tim's torso. The kick connected, sending Tim stumbling back, surprise flashing in his eyes. Damon could see the frustration in Tim's expression, he wasn't expecting such resilience. The two fighters paused for a brief moment, both breathing heavily, sweat dripping from their bodies. Damon's chest heaved as he tried to catch his breath, his mind racing with thoughts of how to survive the next exchange. Tim's relaxed demeanor had been replaced with a more focused intensity, his eyes narrowing as he sized Damon up again. Damon knew he was at a disadvantage, but he also realized that Tim wasn't invincible. The next move could be decisive, and both fighters seemed to sense it. With a burst of speed, Tim darted in, aiming low with a sudden takedown attempt. Damon saw it coming a split second too late, his legs already buckling as Tim's shoulder drove into his midsection. Damon hit the ground hard, the impact jarring him, but he instinctively wrapped his legs around Tim's waist, trying to prevent him from advancing into a dominant position. Damon's lack of grappling experience became evident as he struggled to maintain control, his grip slipping as Tim began to maneuver for a better position. Tim managed to break free, rising slightly above Damon, his fists poised to rain down strikes. Damon braced himself, knowing he was in a bad situation. He tried to twist his body, to find some way to escape, but Tim's weight kept him pinned. Tim's first punch came down, a hammer fist aimed at Damon's face. Damon barely managed to block it with his forearm, but the force of the blow still rattled him. Tim followed up with another, this one slipping through Damon's defense and glancing off the side of his head. The world spun for Damon as he felt the cold, damp grass beneath him and the heavy weight of Tim pressing down. He knew he had to do something, anything, to turn the fight around. Summoning the last of his strength, Damon twisted his hips and managed to throw Tim off balance just enough to create a small opening. He rolled to the side, trying to scramble back to his feet, but Tim was on him again, grabbing him by the waist and dragging him back down. The two fighters were locked in a desperate struggle, neither willing to give an inch. Damon knew he was running out of time, his energy fading with each passing second. Chapter 25, Submission. Recalling a little bit of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Damon pushed Tim inside out of reflex, keeping him from getting the leverage he required to land a blow. Tim grunted in frustration, his attempts to break free becoming more aggressive. Damon's mind raced. He knew he had the knowledge, and the EMMAC system had provided him with the guillotine choke technique. But knowing it and executing it in the heat of the moment were two very different things. He had to time it perfectly, or Tim would slip away and gain the upper hand. Tim suddenly shifted his weight, trying to pass Damon's guard. Damon felt the pressure on his hips, and in a split second, he knew this was the moment. As Tim moved to his side, Damon quickly wrapped his arms around Tim's neck, locking in the guillotine choke. Damon's heart pounded as he tightened the grip, pulling Tim's head down toward his chest. Tim immediately realized the danger and thrashed wildly, trying to escape. Damon squeezed harder, every muscle in his body screaming in protest as he fought to maintain the hold. For a moment, it seemed like Tim might break free. He used his strength to push against Damon's arms, creating just enough space to breathe. Damon felt the choke loosening, and panic surged through him. But he couldn't afford to let go. He had to commit fully to the move. With a burst of effort, Damon adjusted his position, shifting his hips to increase the pressure. He arched his back, pulling Tim's neck tighter into the choke. Tim's movements became more frantic, his arms flailing as he tried to pry Damon's hands off. But Damon held firm, focusing all his energy on the guillotine. Tim's breathing became ragged, the strain evident in his eyes. Damon could feel the desperation in Tim's attempts to escape, but he knew he had the advantage now. The choke was in deep, and Tim was running out of options. Suddenly, Tim managed to slip his arm between Damon's and his own neck, alleviating some of the pressure. Damon cursed under his breath, feeling the grip weaken. Tim began to push up, trying to gain the upper hand once again. But Damon wasn't done yet. He twisted his body, pulling Tim off balance and tightening the choke again. This time, Damon adjusted his grip, breading his arm deeper under Tim's neck. The choke was fully locked in now, and Damon could feel the fight leaving Tim's body. Tim's struggles grew weaker, his movements less coordinated as the oxygen supply to his brain was cut off. Damon knew he was close. He arched his back one final time, applying maximum pressure. Tim's resistance faded, his arms dropping limply to the side. Damon could barely hear the crowd over the sound of his own heartbeat, but he knew they were there, witnessing the moment. He tightened the choke for a few more seconds, ensuring that Tim was fully subdued. And then, with a final gasp, Tim's body went slack, the fight drained out of him. Damon held the choke for another heartbeat, just to be sure, before finally releasing his grip. As Damon slowly rose to his feet, the crowd's collective gaze followed him, their eyes wide with a mix of shock and awe. Each person turned to their neighbors, seeking answers, but none came. Instead, they were met with equally bewildered expressions. What the hell just happened? Someone whispered, their voice barely audible over the sound of their own ragged breathing. Joey, still standing beside the cage, wore a look of utter bewilderment, his smile frozen in place. I think we just got our first submission, he stammered. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, a cacophony of disbelief and excitement. Some people shook their heads, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Others nodded, a slow grin spreading across their faces. The smell of sweat and adrenaline was heavy over the scene, mingling with the sweet scent of victory. The sun beat down on the crowd, casting long shadows across the lawn. As the reality of the situation sunk in, the crowd's cheers grew louder, a deafening roar that threatened to engulf everything in its path. Joey dashed into the makeshift cage, his smile radiant as he raised his hand in a triumphant gesture. He was followed by a few people carrying a bucket of water, which they promptly poured over Tim's limp form. The cold liquid splashed onto Tim's face, sending shockwaves through his body. He jolted awake, his eyes wide with confusion. What happened? Tim stammered, his voice laced with disorientation. He looked around, taking in the concerned faces surrounding him. Damon stood tall, A mixture of relief and amusement etched on his face. Damon thought to himself, it seems he forgot he was even fighting. The realization was almost comical. Tim's confusion was palpable, his eyes darting between Damon and the others as if searching for answers. As Tim struggled to sit up, the water dripping from his hair and face, Damon couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. He had won the fight, and Tim's confusion only added to the sweetness of victory. Joey's smile stretched wide as he clapped Damon on the back. Good job, bro. You're a natural. Damon's eyes dropped, his fingers scratching the back of his head. Just learned a few things on my own, you know. Add to. Joey's gaze lingered, his expression thoughtful. Then, he nodded and turned to face the crowd. Alright, folks. The event's wrapped up, and we've got a winner. His voice rose, booming across the makeshift arena. The event has ended, matches finish, now to announce your winner. Dao Amun. The crowd's response was immediate, a deafening roar that sent Damon's heart racing. Cheers and applause thundered through the air, hands slapping together in a frenzied rhythm. Damon's face split into a wide grin, his arms shooting up in triumph. At novel bananas. Joey grabbed his hand, pumping it in congratulations. Congrats, man. You earned it. As Damon basked in the adoration of the crowd, he felt a sense of validation wash over him. The noise swirled around him. People shouted his name, whistled, and stomped their feet. Damon's chest swelled with pride, his eyes shining with a mix of excitement and relief. I could get used to this.